But it's interesting what it sounds like. It's like you've got to go all in. You can't just like put your toe in and then pull it back out again. You really need to jump in the pool because otherwise it messes up the kids.
In this
Because if
math
you're not
mentoring
doing
moment,
it
you'll
on a
meet Carol Edlin, a
continuous
travel
basis,
bug who
it's
entered
not
teaching with a business
productive.
degree, but slowly and surely began teaching math courses. What is she to do when your background is not mathematics and you're trying to make math moments that matter for all of your students?
Stick around while Carol shows some vulnerability while discussing her lesson flops, and we'll whittle away and reveal her real struggle. Cue up that music.
Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are two math teachers who, together,
with you, the community of math educators worldwide who want to build and deliver math lessons that spark engagement,
fuel learning,
and ignite teacher action. Welcome to episode number 25. How do I avoid lesson flops? A math mentoring moment. Are you ready, John?
Oh yeah, I can't wait. Let's dive into this episode with Carol while she shares some of her challenges in the math classroom, and she looks to reach every student in a school with high ELL and ESL learners with the Math Moment Maker community. It can be easy to pick an interesting looking task and just try it in your class, but as you'll hear in this episode, Carol realizes that planning with intentionality is so important in order to ensure the task runs smoothly.
Before we dive in, we have had over 100 founding members join the Make Math Moments Academy. Those educators who have already started sharing their past successes and challenges with each other. They've been learning with our brand new mini course titled The Concept Holding Your Students Back, so you too can eliminate the guesswork and stop throwing stuff at the wall and hoping something sticks. The Academy provides you with resources you can count on. Take a moment right now, check out the Academy and see if it's a good fit for you. You can learn more at makemathmoments.com/academy. That's makemathmoments.com/academy.
Okay, let's see if we can't help find some next steps for Carol to push her practice forward. So we are here with Carol Edlin, and we can't be more excited to chat with her. Welcome to the podcast, Carol.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's all our pleasure. We just want to start off with a couple questions. We want to get to know you a little bit. We want the audience to get to know you. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself? What do you teach? Where are you from? What's your teaching story?
Well, I teach in San Diego at a middle school. I am actually not from here. I grew up in Colorado and moved here in my 30s. When I started teaching, I didn't start out wanting to be a teacher. It was something that was a means to an end because I realized I wanted to travel. And the way for me to travel was to have my summers free. And I kind of like teaching. I have a degree in business, and I was able to become a business teacher from the beginning, and it was a lot of fun. I taught marketing and business law, and since I had enough math credits from my business education, I was able to sub in and take over some math classes when there was at the beginning of the year and high enrollment in the school that I used to teach at. So I kind of started in the math area from there. Because I wanted to travel so much, I was able to find a way to teach overseas. And I moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1999 to teach at the American School of Buenos Aires. And I was hired to teach math. So I went down as a full math teacher, and I was given geometry and Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and International Baccalaureate Math Studies. And I had never really studied that much math, so it was quite an eye-opener.
That story, I think, hits home with both of us. You know, teaching in Buenos Aires definitely sounds amazing. I myself, when I first started teaching, I moved down to the Caribbean and taught on the island of St. Martin for a few years.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And like you said, mine was an American school, but I taught in an Ontario school, which was perfect for me being from Ontario. It was a very small private school there. And I did my first 2 years teaching there and teaching math. And actually, I taught business and math and physics and accounting. And so I was the guy that did everything down there because the school was so small. Kyle, I think you got something similar, right?
Yeah. It wasn't for as long as you both were abroad, but I had an opportunity one summer, I think it was my second year teaching, to go and teach computer science, well, not computer science courses, but it was more like computer courses for business and photo editing and Excel and PowerPoint and all of those tools on a cruise ship for a summer. So
Oh,
yeah, that was a really cool experience.
Sounds like party time.
yeah,
Yeah,
really.
well, I got my traveling in. My wife at the time we weren't married yet. We were just engaged to be married, and she went to South Korea for the summer with a friend to do some teaching English over there. So it was tough being away, but at the same time, it was a great experience to get to go and see all kinds of different parts of the world. So it sounds like traveling is in your blood. And just to be clear, it sounds like you might be teaching at the high school level. Maybe I missed that. Is that true? High school?
I started as a high school teacher, and I have a California single subject credential in business with the supplementary in math. And what that does is allows me to teach up through ninth grade math, but I can't teach elementary school because I don't have the right credential. So I am stuck in the middle. I just came back to the States 3 years ago, and I've been teaching now for 2 years in a middle school. So I've taught sixth, seventh, and this year, eighth grade math.
Oh, and what's your perspective there? Like, how is that turning out for you compared to, some of the experience you may have had abroad in teaching some of the older grades?
Yeah, it's a tough. It's really tough. I miss the high school. I miss the maturity level of the high school students, and it's been a rough couple of years. But I've also been teaching in a rough couple. The two schools I've taught in are pretty rough schools. They're lower income. A lot of refugees are in the schools. The one I'm teaching in right now actually is more that way. Today, I just got a child from, I can't even say the name of the country because he spoke so soft and he doesn't speak any English, but an African country. I have a lot of refugees, a lot of English language learners, and it's very different. The age as well as just the circumstance, because in Argentina, I was teaching children of diplomats. So it was a very different dynamic.
Sure. I'm sure there's lots of learning so far and probably a lot of learning still to be had, I'm sure, when you're put into a very different situation. So interesting. So I'm sure we will come back to some of those pieces. We're wondering, as we ask most people when they come on the podcast, what is your most memorable moment about math class? And we say about math class because maybe it might be your math class experience as a student, or maybe it's from maybe when you were teaching. But what comes to mind when the word math class is said?
Well, it's interesting because I thought about this question, and it's kind of, I was a teacher and a student at the same time, because when I went to the international school and they told me I was teaching geometry, and I did not do well in geometry in high school, and I had not had a geometry class since high school. So I had to teach myself geometry. I was that teacher who was doing the lesson the night before. I did every homework problem the night before I gave the kids the homework problem. And I taught it to myself as a 35-year-old woman, and I actually got it. It was the weirdest thing. I never got it in high school. It didn't make any sense to me in high school. I couldn't understand the theorems. I couldn't understand why we had to do what we had to do. And as I taught it to myself in Argentina, all of a sudden everything made sense. It all fit. It all made sense. And I found an incredible joy in teaching it to the students. We did a lot of fun stuff. We did, things, tessellations. And one of my favorite things was making a Christmas tree for the entry of the building of our high school using the Sierpinski triangles. My administration bought into it and got me glue guns and got me green construction paper. And we made this huge tree. I don't remember how many levels it was. It was a long time ago, but it was really fun becoming a geometry teacher.
Very cool. I want to commend you for doing the work necessary. I know that sometimes it can be a challenge, even if I know that when I started in my career, I thought I understood the math through high school, but when I came to actually teach it, I remember myself doing a lot of that same process for those first few years where I felt like it was only a few days ahead of the kids and I wanted to make sure I understood it deeply. So I'm glad to hear that you did the work. It sounds like, you put a lot of time and effort into that. And that's so important for us to really understand the content in order for us to be able to stand even the slightest chance of helping our students to understand it.
Yeah, it was hard. I was single and I didn't have children at the time. So I had the time to put in, which is not the case today. But I'm glad I had the time and I'm glad I was able to do that. But what I think was just so interesting is that everything connected. And in high school, when I was learning it, it was seemed so arbitrary and so bizarre, just these theorems and postulates that didn't make any sense. But it helped me to learn that we learn the math at different ages. And I know that that's what's being talked about all the time now with Joe Bowler and a lot of these other people and you guys about it's not necessarily how fast you do it because somebody can be 5 minutes behind the next person. And maybe I had been 5 minutes behind in high school, but my teacher didn't give me that extra 5 minutes. And so it never connected. So it was really cool to think that your brain matures and your ability to learn mathematics also matures.
I just want to stay on this just a little bit longer because it really interests me. Like when you said that you didn't get it in high school and you just gave a couple of reasons, but I'm wondering if we can dive in on that just a little bit longer. Like, what else do you think may have caused you not to get it when you were in high school, other than the couple things you've just mentioned?
I don't know because I had my geometry teacher. She was one of my favorite teachers. I didn't get the geometry, but I liked her. So it wasn't like it was because I didn't like my teacher. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on that one.
And maybe it might be like you articulated very clearly that our brains all mature at different stages and all of our experiences are so different from birth to high school ages where all of those things impact where we are and our readiness and the prior knowledge we have to bring in, even maybe some of the outside factors going on in our lives. Like, am I distracted by other things going on? Is there issues in my family? There's so many things for students when we were students and also for the students in our classrooms right now. So really interesting. Thank you for sharing. We're wondering to get us started. We start off on a positive note with maybe something that you feel has been going well for you over the last little while in your class. So maybe something that you've tried or maybe been reflecting on and feeling like you're seeing some changes there. Maybe you're not at the end of that journey, but you're seeing that you're heading in the right direction in that particular area.
Well, I'm really struggling right now because I got very lucky this year. I was partnered up with another teacher who's teaching 8th grade math, who has been just a godsend to me and giving me resources. And we talk about what we're teaching every day and we work together and we use a flip chart is what it's called on our Promethean boards. And he really works with me to make sure that we're doing the same thing. And if I don't understand what the standard is and how we should go about teaching it, he's really there to help me. I feel very, very lucky to have him it's not a co-teacher, but as the other counterpart of the 8th grade math department. I feel like this year has been a lot better because I'm used to this age group and kind of how to deal with the rules, which I was very lax on last year, but coming in and having a procedure and having a warm up and having the students understand how things are going or should be going every day. And it seems to be making things a lot easier. Whereas I think as a high school teacher, I was a little bit more laid back and wasn't as tough as I found I needed to be, which is where I struggle with these ideas of project-based learning and teaching using tasks because I'm afraid of letting the kids get off task or off of a topic and not being able to bring them back. And I don't know if it's the age group or me, or the fact that I'm not really sure how to run these types of classes.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge difference when you go from one level, whether it's a grade level, but in your case, going from secondary or high school all the way back to middle school. We've got students at a younger age. There's different sort of procedures and norms that take place in classrooms. I know I can relate because I've spent the last couple years formally coming from secondary, from high school, and I now spend a lot of my time in K-8. So I'm going into classrooms and it's like I am learning something new every single time I go in, do any type of co-teaching or actually delivering a lesson about norms and about structure and about, things that I take for granted coming from secondary land. And those are definitely challenging. And it's great to hear that you've seen some successes in that area. So I'm wondering, can we go a little bit deeper with, you'd mentioned like project-based learning and so forth. Can you help folks listening in kind of get an understanding of like what that looks like or sounds like to you when you reference things like project-based learning or these activity-based sort of investigations that you mentioned earlier?
Well, it has to kind of start from a little bit back. When I was in Argentina, we taught out of a book. I was not a trained math teacher, and so I had never really heard of standards. I left for Argentina in 99. So back, we just taught chapter one, chapter two, chapter three in order and every single lesson. And just like I remember hearing one of your earlier podcasts, you teach 3 lessons, then you have a quiz, then you teach the next 3 lessons, then you have a test in chapter two. And when I came back a couple of years ago, all of a sudden I'm presented with these standards and project-based learning, and I had not a clue. And last year I paid my way. My principal, I was lucky enough to have given me the 3 days of substitutes, but I got my own hotel, my own plane ticket, and paid the fee to go to the NCTM conference. And I just happened to stumble into Dan Meyer's How Good Lessons Go Bad, I think was the name of his seminar that he gave his presentation. And I saw this 3-act math thing where he was talking about Girl Scout cookies and volume and the Nissan car. And oh my God, I got so excited. I thought, oh, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to get my kids excited. And I went to some other of the workshops and I just had tons and tons of ideas. I took tons of pictures with my phone. I took tons of notes. I went back to the classroom in April. I tried that 3-act that lesson about the Girl Scout cookies and volume because that's what we were doing in 7th grade. And it flopped. And
Mhm.
I didn't know how to do it. And so I've been trying to read as much as I can. Over the summer, I read a bunch of books, and that's how I found you guys because when I was at the NCTM, I didn't know what Twitter was really. It was something that I don't know the stars did and Donald Trump and whatever, but I never had gotten involved in Twitter. And so I got on to the Twitters of you all and of Dan and of Joe Bowler and of a few other ones that I can't think off the top of my head, trying to figure out how I can make these lessons engaging to my students and how I can incorporate it into my lessons so that they are excited and paying attention and wanting to learn this math. And that's where I'm stuck because I can't seem to make the jump from these tasks or these projects. And yeah.
I don't know if you listened to all the podcasts so far. Probably not. There's been a few, and there's one particular episode where we, I think, say exactly this story.
I listened to 1 through 4. I started to listen to 5 and I stopped, but today I was listening to 5. So yeah, I do. You were talking about like, how do you make that transition into doing these kinds of things? And one of the things you guys mentioned was the preparation, but I still don't quite know how to prepare because kids started asking me questions and I didn't know how to answer them. And then I started feeling like, oh, I don't want to put myself in a position where I don't have the answer or even know how to find the answer.
We were in that situation where we saw Dan and we took it back and it was a flop. And I think we've got a couple suggestions here for you, but I'd like to hear more about why you think it was such a flop. Like, I wonder if you could imagine or go back in your memory to that lesson and walk us through what that looked like. And I know you'd have to be really brave to say that out loud, but we're wondering what that looked like for you. You said a couple things about questions that kids had, but I'm wondering with that particular lesson that you first tried, if we could hear what that sounded like, I wonder if we can give you some tips.
Well, honestly, the Girl Scout cookies, I guess that one was not as bad. I mean, I was able to get through it. I think what ended up happening is I didn't know what to do after we looked at it. And I ended up giving them how you find the volume because I didn't understand that they had to figure that out on their own. And I was like, well, how are they going to get this if I don't tell them that it's width times length times height? And so I gave them that and we did the estimating, but I probably after listening to your other podcast, yeah, I should have said, some of them said 2. And I was like, okay, that's ridiculous. Of course it's not 2. Yeah. And then, one of them, like you had said, it said 1,000,000. I'm like, okay, well, that's also ridiculous. But now after listening to you, I'm like, I could have said, let's take a risk and let's see how close we could get and let them continue with it. But after we got done looking at the 3 different videos, I think there were 3 in that one, I didn't know how to give them practice problems, for example. I didn't know how to get them to do some work, to then be able to, I don't know if I'm supposed to be giving practice problems or if that was enough for them to learn it or if I had to bring in other resources. But the other one that I did with my accelerated 6th grade class was there was one where you had a guy standing in front of a wall with a bunch of dollar bills. Have you
Mm-hmm.
guys seen that one?
Yeah.
And then they pull back and then they pull back again. And you have this room covered with dollar bills in this museum. And so I printed out the floor plan and the blueprints and I divided the kids up. And then we kind of just didn't know what to do. We did some division and I got stuck. I said, I don't really know how to proceed after we divide. We figure out what is the distance between the dollars and then you divide it and then what? I mean, it just kind of I didn't know how to have that flowing into the next part, I guess. Does that make sense?
Totally does. Totally does. And yeah, this is again, we're feeling your pain because we know what that is like. I'm wondering when you selected. So, for example, I know what I did when I came across Dan's material and then later some of the others that are great. Dane Euler for high schools, great. So many others are out there. And what I tended to do is I grabbed that lesson that was modeled in that session because I guess probably twofold. First of all, I felt comfortable with it because I just did it. So I sort of knew it. It's kind of felt like I had planned my lesson. And then secondly, it was I didn't have to go digging for something and I just sort of wanted to try it out. So that's probably what happened with the Girl Guide cookie example. You saw it and you were like, all right, let's try this out and let's, take a risk and see how things go. I'm going to butcher the name of the task with the dollar bills on the wall, but I'm picturing Robert Kaplinsky's site, but I could be wrong.
No, I think it's a
we'll
Dan site. I think it's a Dan.
Is it a Dan
You
one?
think it's
Yeah.
Dan? I don't remember where I found
Yeah,
it.
we'll
Okay,
double check and put it in the show notes for
we'll
sure.
dig it out. For sure.
Okay.
We'll dig that out. But with that particular problem, I guess what motivated you to want to try that one particular task on that particular day?
Well, I was looking for problems that were based on volume and area. Volume I used for my 7th grade and area is what I wanted to use for my 6th grade, just because that's part of our standards. So I Googled or I went through looking for something that matched with that standard, and that's how I came upon that. I also thought it was cool, and I thought the kids would find it was cool. And so, of course, none of them believed it. I believed it when I saw it, but they were like, no, this is fake. There's no way. So it was hard for them to buy in because they didn't think it was real. But that's how I found it, was just kind of going through, I think it must be Dan's, that I have a huge Excel worksheet in my Google Drive that I must have downloaded from him.
He's
And
got one
it's
of those.
got tons of different standards listed next to it. That's how I found it.
We keep saying this, but that's probably what I did first too. It's I found his spreadsheet and I scanned it for what I was looking for. And I think that's what we all do. We're looking for a new lesson or a lesson to address a learning goal that we're looking at or a topic. And we go and we find one. We're like, okay, I'm wondering, what did you do next? You found this lesson online and then what?
Then I downloaded the pictures and the video. I downloaded the blueprints to the museum space. And there was a copy of a dollar bill on a grid so they could count how many millimeters or centimeters it was. It was done in your type of measurements, not in the
Right.
US measurements. And so each kid got one of those. I said to the kids, I wanted them to group up and to try and figure out how many dollar bills would fit in this room. And we talked about the columns, because there's a couple columns in there, the doorways that wouldn't be covered. They all went and found the area of all of the spaces and found the area of the dollar bill. And then I didn't know where to go from there. I was like, okay, well, I guess that's what we found. And it wasn't the $1 million that it said it was. The way the kids figured it out, we didn't get even close to $1 million. And I just said, all right, we're done, because that was all I knew how to do from there. I don't know if I answered your question all the way.
No, I think you did.
No, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's helpful for us to kind of get an idea of where you're coming from when you selected that task. So you had a learning or a standard in
Goal.
mind.
Yeah.
What in your mind did you feel like your students might be bringing with them to that lesson? When you entered that particular lesson, was there certain things that you felt like students sort of had in their tool belt that they might be able to access? Or was it more like, let's just see what they have with them? Because, I do that sometimes as well. is kind of like, let's see what they've got and, use it almost like a diagnostic? What was kind of going on there?
These kids were accelerated 6th grade, and they're top kids. I remember doing some of the which one doesn't belong, and I would put the numbers up. I wouldn't do graphs, but there'd be a 3, a 9, a 8, and a 17 or whatever. And I had these kids last period, and I do it in all of my classes. This was my only accelerated class. And these kids in the accelerated class would come up with things that none of the other classes had come up with. I mean, in the other classes, they'd repeat. I'd hear the same thing over and over. Well, this doesn't belong because it's got 2 digits or something like that. But these kids would come up with amazing things that I had never even thought about why this wouldn't belong. And they're just top notch kids and their ability to think and to explain and to do mathematics. So when I saw this, I didn't know what they really had, except for I knew that they would be able to figure it out just because of the way they were able to figure out all the problems I put in front of them.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So it sounds like these students are, you said, accelerated. So, clearly they have a lot going on there in order for them to be in that particular program. Do you feel like maybe there might be some students there who are maybe not so eager to take risks, like maybe feeling like they're kind of dependent on being sort of pre-taught before they attempt something? Like, I know that for me, for years, I used to teach a lesson and then kind of like scaffold up until I got to like word problems. And then the lesson fell apart when kids were like, oh, now I can't do these word problems. Like, do you think there might be some of that there or any other factors like that? Are you feeling from maybe the classroom culture or maybe what they believe math class should be?
In that particular class, a little bit, but not so much because they were just so eager to learn. But like for an instance, in the class that I have right now, so I'm teaching a regular Common Core as we Common Core 8th grade, and we're just finishing up being able to graph a line from slope-intercept form and a little bit of standard form. And we're starting next week to do systems of equations. And these kids are not the kind of kids that are wanting to, if I say, okay, what do you notice? I don't think they're going to participate that much because they're not wanting to put themselves out. They're not going to, what do you wonder? Nothing. Why are we doing this? That kind of thing is what I'm going to get from the kids I have today. And so I would like to figure out a way to bring in something fun like this to do systems of equations, but I have no clue because these kids from last year, they would do anything I put in front of them because they were just so eager to learn math. The kids this year, not so much.
I've definitely been in that situation also. For me, it comes down to setting that or bringing that culture on a regular basis. And what I mean by that is I think when I first started doing these tasks, I viewed them as like one-off tasks. Like I would do it. I'm like, okay, here's that grade test going to fit right in here. And we'll normally teach the lesson and normally kids will do their work. And then, you know what, I want to make them engaged on this one idea because I found this great lesson. So I'll put it in here. And so when I do that, my students react in a way that it's like, I don't know what's going on because this is not the way class normally runs. So that's like a natural reaction to be like, okay, wait, what's going on here? And then they're not sure what to do. And I think what happens is when we view it that way, they don't get used to that being something that's allowed in class. Like, so I guess to elaborate more on that if I've always kind of just taught my lesson and gave the examples and asked them to do some practice questions, which can be fine. But then when I throw the task in there, it's almost like this, all of a sudden there's now student voice involved and kids will be resistant to give that voice if there's one, it's not consistent in the class. Like if it's all of a sudden we're doing this, what do you mean? I don't usually do this. And then the other, it's like, how is the atmosphere so that if I say something, will it be well received? Like there's definitely that kind of culture that has to exist. And I've been in situations like that with other teachers where I go into the class and they're trying that lesson they're just putting it in there as a one-off kind of lesson and it just flops hugely because it's not a regular thing. And to go back to like when we first did it, that's what happened. It flopped majorly because we were just sticking it in one spot and thinking this is going to be the savior of this particular learning goal. But because it wasn't part of our culture, it just doesn't hit the mark the way, you see it in the workshop or you see it on the internet. And one thing that we've done to address this is to do more of that culture building than we used to. So for example, like one thing that I do now on a regular basis is I spend 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of class, maybe 10 more, like 10 minutes at the beginning of class, doing small versions of this. Like you brought up which one doesn't belong. And I'll do one of those a week where I'm asking students to turn and talk to each other about which one doesn't belong, and they have to make a choice. And then now we voice those out loud. So they're getting used to, and those are great because you can't be wrong as long as you have a reason. So like you are definitely bringing that culture of student voice into your room, and the students get used to saying stuff out loud that they know, one, they can't be wrong, and everyone has an opinion to that. Another thing we do is like we'll do an estimation 180 task at the beginning of class, and I do this at all levels, high school all the way down to they can go down to very low levels, and I do the same thing. It's like what's too high, what's too low, what's your best guess, and in the first like 5 times I do that, everybody has to say what their guess is. And if you make it part of your regular routine, then when it's time to do the notice and wonder, it's not a shock to their system. And I think that they will adapt to that. Sometimes I'll have a tough class, and that tough class is like, oh, and if it's one of the first times, you're going to get some kids that are like, what's going on here? And that's their notice and wonder, right? And I write those on the board. Like, if I say, what do you notice and wonder, turn and talk to your partner, and they do that. And then when it's time for us to say them out loud, and the kid's like, well, why are we doing this? That's my wonder. I'll write that on the board. And the kid's like, wait a minute, I didn't get the reaction that I thought I was going to get from the teacher. That goes on the board. And then the next time we do it, it's not such a big deal. And they know that, because I love that question. That question, I go right back at the end of the lesson when we solved the problem and we brought out the learning goal, made it explicit. We can go right back to that student and say, like, why did we do this? Like, what do you think now? And so I think the biggest thing is changing your classroom culture so that it's accepting of all of these kind of techniques that are new. I'm not saying you're not doing that already. I'm just saying that I think that can help for sure.
But it's interesting what it sounds like. It's like you've got to go all in. You can't just like put your toe in and then pull it back out again. You really need to jump in the pool, because otherwise it messes up the kids. Because if you're not doing it on a continuous basis, it's not productive.
It becomes a guessing game, right? Of like, okay, like what's today going to be like? And this is exactly what we did. Like, we're right there with you. I would try, once a unit to do a 3-act math task, and I'd get all geeked out about it. I was excited, and it would be like, that didn't really go over too well. And, and I missed a lot of pieces, like the whole culture piece John talked about. But then there's also a piece that I wanted to mention as well, which may or may not apply to your situation, where like when streaming, or, we call it streaming in Ontario here, or tracking or different placement of students is going on. Like, if you're dealing with students who tend to be the quote unquote math kids, right? The ones that are the stronger ones, we call it a rich program here, or gifted programs, or whatever it might be. You're now dealing with a group of students who have been kind of put on this pedestal, and maybe rightfully so, because they have lots of prior knowledge, and they're quite intelligent. But in reality, though, sometimes they can have an even more challenging time trying to build into this culture that John's describing. And part of the reason is because they're scared to be exposed that maybe I'm not as smart as I thought, right? I've been told that I've been smart, against what, the research from Carol Dweck and growth mindset, and all the language around trying to push students and promoting students and celebrating their successes through effort instead of through smarts, like it's something that I was born with. And Joe Bowler talks about those things as well. This could be really, really challenging for those students to kind of tear down that wall, that barrier, to be open and be okay. Because a lot of times too, if I'm doing a 3-act math task and I'm truly asking them to notice and wonder without me sort of setting the stage and saying, hey, today we're going to solve ratios and here's a task we're going to do, it's sort of like, well, there's nothing to notice and wonder anymore. So by trying to build that culture and making math class a place where we throw out ideas and we support each other, and we're not judging each other based on what we say and the predictions that we make, even if my prediction is off, like significantly, it's like we accept those predictions and we try to unpack like why that person might have came up with that prediction. So this could be something for you to kind of think about. And I know in my experience, some of my more strong students tend to push back hardest, at least when I started. So that was just a personal experience. It might have just been a fluke, but I'm wondering if maybe there might be something to it for you as well, to at least have it in the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's interesting. I heard you say something about that on one of your other podcasts, how the students who usually get the A who have learned the trick of, memorize the formula and remember the questions that you put in your homeworks or in your classwork so that then they can use those. If they memorize that or they know how to do it, then they can pass the test and they get their A's. And they push back a lot when you did these kind of different 3 acts or the notice and wonder kind of thing. And it was funny because I was thinking about this when I played a game with we call it Step Up, but it's more like a remedial math class, a Step Up math. And I played Cannibals and Missionaries with them on the computer. Do you all know that game?
No. Can you
Yeah,
fill
no,
us in a
let
little
us.
bit?
It's a logic game. You have 3 cannibals and 3 missionaries who come to a river and they have to cross the river on a raft. 2 people at the most can be on the raft. It cannot be without a person. It can't come back without a person. You have to get all of the 6 people onto the other side, and you can never have more cannibals than missionaries, or the cannibals will eat the missionaries. So you have to figure out how to get everyone across. And I have a couple of math students who are very good. They do very well in my class. They're A students. Well, they got so irritated and so upset that they could not figure this out within a couple of minutes. And it took a while. Everyone pretty much got it, or I wouldn't say everyone, but I'd say by the end of the period, 75% of my students got it. But the ones that are the A students were angry. They were angry before 5 minutes were up because they didn't get it and they wanted to get it now. And I didn't give them the answer and I made them keep working and they were pissed and frustrated. And one of them closed the computer and said, I'm not going to do it. And it was really, it was very interesting watching the behavior. But he opened it up again and he finally got it. But oh my goodness.
I have a very similar experience. I had a problem that I've used with students as young as grade 5, and I gave it to some grade 11 IB students. And I was not there. It was sort of through the grapevine, passed it on to an IB teacher. And they challenged their students, and literally they were saying how the problem was dumb and doesn't make any sense and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, like the day prior, I was in a grade 5 class, kids were rocking it. They obviously didn't go nearly as far as we would with a grade 10 or 11 class. But in reality, the kids in the grade 5 class solved it less efficiently, but they were on task, rocking it. And, the students gave up so quickly. And again, I feel like there's that pressure to know it fast, like we have that culture of math is about answers and doing things quickly and not making mistakes and all of these things that, we want to make sure that we try to turn around for our students. So that's a big piece. But then the last piece that I want to share before we start talking about maybe some next steps and maybe some reflecting is after we got our classroom cultures going, and I say going because it's never done. Like you're constantly trying to build that culture and make it stronger and stronger and, more supportive and all of those things. But what we realized after some time is like we were feeling better about the culture. Kids were participating. We were getting some buy-in in this type of teaching approach. But we realized that the same kids who were struggling prior to us doing this were still struggling when it came to actually doing the math and like doing the sense making. So they were stuck or giving up. And what we realized is that we did not spend nearly enough time on the intentionality of the tasks that we were using. So we were picking our standard or our curriculum expectation, as we call it here in Ontario. We would pick that volume of a cylinder, and we would pick that and then we would do the task, but we didn't really pay enough attention to like what were we hoping the kids would be able to pull out of that particular task, that particular lesson. What were we going to consolidate, and like what did they have or what did they need in order for them to be able to access that task. So those were things like big, big wonders. And it's something we still work on today. It's not like it's an overnight solution. But once we that got on our radar, we started to think more about it, reflect more, plan more before our lessons. And we were seeing significant changes in the ability of some students to be able to actually tackle the math. So that was something I wanted to make sure that we, sort of threw out there as well, just for anyone listening who might have similar issues and maybe they're getting that classroom culture going, but they're just feeling like, the wheels are still spinning, but now maybe somewhere else. So hopefully that's helpful.
It's funny. I didn't know how to plan, so I didn't. So, I mean,
Right.
it was
Yeah.
all right. Well, here's the lesson. Did you guys do the Kit Kat 3X?
I did do a Kit Kat on fractions and adding,
Yeah,
subtract.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So I did that one and I had no idea how to plan for it. So I just started showing the videos. And I did that in my step up class this year. And I got a little lost and I wasn't really sure where to go because I didn't know how to plan for it. I think that is a key. And it's something that I have to think about what they're going to say, and that's the part where I get lost. So how am I going to know what they're going to come up with? But I do think that that's a very important part because without it, any of these that I have tried, the Kit Kat, the Girl Scout cookies, the dollar wall, those are all ones that I think if I could have prepared better, but I think that's where I'm probably going to need most of my help.
That was one of the things I think that has helped me the most is realizing that if I'm going to go to the internet and I'm going to choose one of Dan's tasks or one of Andrew Stadell's tasks from their spreadsheets or one of Kyle's tasks, some of those, like I know when I go to Kyle's site, tapintoTeenMinds.com, Kyle is really great at giving you a walkthrough on what to expect, what that might look like in his classroom, which is like half the planning right there. And some of the other sites might just show videos when you get there. So one of the biggest things that helped me was I would do the problem myself for sure. And when I would do the problem myself for sure to see what I would do to solve that problem. But like what Kyle said is you want to write out solutions that you think your students will do based on the information or the knowledge they have coming into that. So if they don't know anything about volume yet and you're doing the volume question, you're thinking, okay, well, how would they solve this without volume? So you might think they can't, so that you're ready for that, so that you can step in and go like, you might have sparked their curiosity and got their attention to go like, I want to solve this problem, but I don't know how yet. I wish I had a way to do it. And then you can step in and go, I was prepared for this moment. And now we're going to bring out this, build into the idea of where volume of a prism comes from. And so then you can explicitly go through that with your students. And then you can turn back to the problem and go like, now let's use it to solve this problem. Or it might be they have some, like if you're working with rates and ratios, or, you said you were into linear relations, like they might have some inkling on like how to use slope to graph the line, but not have any formal techniques yet. And so when you plan to do a lesson like that, you're going to map out what you think they might try as a solution. And you might have 4 to 5 different ways they might try that, or maybe 2. But the fact that you've planned that piece is when you see that from your student who's trying that, you prepared for that so you can direct them where to go next. And like what Kyle said, we have this learning goal in mind we want to get to, so that you can, when you see those solutions, you've also planned like, what are your moves next? Like if you see a solution that's not quite there, how are we going to move those students towards that learning goal we want to bring out? So I think writing out those solutions in advance definitely helps me be ready for what the students are going to do. And it also helps me plan some of those possible questions. Like you said at the very beginning, that sometimes kids bring up questions and it makes us feel uneasy because we're not ready to answer those questions. And I think the more planning you can do about what the solutions might look like can help you with that too. And also planning for the end. Like you want to plan, like, where do you want to go ultimately? And you want to get there either that period, or maybe you're planning for just cover over a couple periods. But I think that explicit planning is one of the most helpful things for using these types of lessons.
Definitely. I'll try that on this next one.
Awesome. Yeah. And planning, John and I know now, we wish we knew it a long time ago. We realize that that's probably the most important part. And again, the biggest miss for us. And we do spend a lot of time on that in our online workshop. So if you haven't checked out the 4-part lesson series that we have online, make sure you check that out. And then in the full workshop, we have a whole module on planning. So that is an option as well. If anyone out there is sort of struggling with the same thing, that's a place you might be able to go to dive a little deeper there beyond what we were able to address today. But at this time, we're wondering if we can get into the reflection portion of this conversation. And we're wondering if you can imagine your math class like 3 months from now, if you were to make some changes, maybe some changes that you've heard from this conversation. Like, what are you hoping that your math class would look like? And then maybe we can go into maybe some takeaways that you might be able to try to put into practice now, and then maybe some that you might still need to do some reflecting on to put in later.
Well, it seems silly, but I mean, what I'd love to have it look like is, the kids working on interesting problems where they're engaged and they're excited and they're learning, and I'm still covering the standards so that I don't get in trouble with my admin.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, that instead of just worksheet after worksheet, or writing in our interactive notebook, which is something I actually really think is cool. That was something that didn't exist before I was back in the States. So I would like to see that engagement. I'd like to see them being able to learn and do fun stuff at the same time, which they're not doing right now.
Right. Those are some good ambitions there for sure. We're wondering also from this conversation, like what would be a big takeaway from you? Like we talked about a lot of things here, a lot of big ideas, a lot of specifics too, but what would be a big takeaway from this conversation for you in particular?
I would like to find a task, something to hit system of equations. And we have to do testing next week, state testing. So I have next week to plan to then start implementing the week after. And so the takeaway is the planning is really I am kind of lucky. I have a 9th grade son, so I might put him to work to be my guinea pig to come up with ideas, for him to say this is where he might go with it. And so I can come up with some different strategies or, know the question or the answers to possible questions and the planning of it.
Right on. Yeah, that would be great. And, off the top of our mind, we've got a few for systems of equations. I know Andrew Stedell has basketball shots. We'll put that in the show notes. I've got a couple as well. One that I tend to use for system of equations is the detention buyout, which is kind of a quirky situation where 3 students get a bunch of different detentions, and the administrators are giving 3 different options to buy out of detention, and the students have to determine which is the best buy for each.
It's a fun one.
For each student. And then also the Counting Candies sequel. So we'll put all 3 of those in the show notes. But our challenge to you would be, if you do pick one of those, or maybe you find something else, is to kind of take that task and really tear it apart yourself and try to solve it. We like to try to think about solving it in as many ways as you possibly can. And it can be very challenging to try to put your mind in the minds of your students and to try to think of I would like sometimes to think about a student who tends to maybe come up with some interesting or different or maybe peculiar unordinary solution strategies. Like, what would that student maybe be thinking? And then maybe also thinking about a student who tends to struggle a little bit more. Like, what's that student's access point to the task? What might I be able to do? What questions and prompts might I be able to sort of have ready for that student? Or maybe even warm up activity prior to introducing this task to get them thinking, not pre-teaching, but to bring out some of that prior knowledge so that, they have a little bit of that leaping point and are able to tackle that task. Is that a challenge that you'd be willing to accept?
Oh, for sure.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff.
Well, we're wondering if it's okay with you. We would love to maybe follow up with you on the podcast, maybe 6 to 9 months from now, to see how things are moving along. A little bit of accountability there for you, so that we can kind of touch base again. Obviously, you're more than welcome to touch base with us through email or Twitter or Facebook, however you choose. But to get us back on the show and kind of see where you're at with that classroom culture and kind of building that intentionality into your planning, would that be something that you'd be open to coming back on?
Yeah, that sounds great. 6 to 8 months gives me a lot of time.
Absolutely. And no pressure.
In between.
Yeah, and it's a slow process for sure. It's take a little bit at a time. I think the thinking is the most important part here. It's not like the physical doing, but the thinking and reflecting. Those are the big pieces where I think you're going to see the biggest, the most significant difference. And hopefully the podcast episodes that are coming out every week will be something that, you can put your earbuds in, sort of kind of build on some of the things that we were chatting about and what we'll be chatting with some future guests as well. So
Well, you guys get to walk with me in the morning, so that's a good.
Oh,
That's where I
great.
get my
I
podcasts on
need
my
the
morning walk.
exercise.
Yeah, I
Thank
gotta,
you.
I
Thanks.
gotta get out there and do some stuff. Carol, we want to thank you for joining us. I know that every time we talk on this podcast, I get a lot of great information to take back to my classroom too, from you and Kyle. And we just want to thank you for joining us here. And I guess we wish you all the best luck back in the classroom.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all the help.
Well, there you have it. That was Carol Edlin from San Diego, California. We're looking forward to checking back with her to see how she's incorporated her biggest takeaways from this call over the next 6 to 12 months.
Me as well, John. I was really impressed with how far Carol has come, considering she's entered the profession with a business degree, not a math degree, and then began teaching mathematics at the high school level. She then managed to figure things out and then moved down to middle school, and it sounds like she's well on her way to getting things sorted out there as well. In order to get better, we must all be willing to do the work necessary to better understand the content in order to be the best teacher we can be. And despite the fact that she's doing the work, she still acknowledges the fact that there's always work to be done. So hats off to Carol for wanting to continue to do more and get better at this thing we call teaching. So lifelong learner there. It's been a pleasure having a chat with Carol today.
This was another Math Mentoring Moment episode with many more to come, where we will have a conversation with a member of the Making Math Moments That Matter community, like you, who is working through a challenge, and together we will brainstorm ideas and next steps to help overcome it. If you want to join us on the podcast for an upcoming Math Mentoring Moment episode where you can share those big math struggles, you can apply over at makemathmoments.com/mentor. That is makemathmoments.com/mentor.
In order to ensure you don't miss out on new episodes as they come out each week, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you're liking what you're hearing, please share the podcast with a colleague and help us reach an even wider audience by leaving us a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or whatever platform you are listening to right now.
Show notes and links to resources from this episode can be found at makemathmoments.com/episode 25. Again, that is makemathmoments.com/episode 25.
Well, until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And high fives for you.